Okay, I'm going to share screen again. It centers around really a change in people. People have just seen it as a kind of a weakness of certain individuals who need to get their act together, but it's now also become defined as a particular form of psychological complaint. Apparently, about 2 to 6% of the population are pathological hoarders. But the thing that was developed in 2008 was something called the Clutter Image Rating Scale by Frost and Steckety. Replace some of the vague self-definitions of hoarding with a more objective measure of sorts. So it consists of images of different interiors: kitchen, bedroom, living room. This is the kitchen, and it shows it on a progressive scale. So that's the kitchen, and this one's a living room. So you can see it starts off. You can see that the space is more or less empty. You can make out the floor. The surface of a coffee table has a neat pile of newspapers and the cushion on the sofa. By the fourth images, there are piles of clothes and electrical items cover most of the floor and all of the available seating. By the ninth, the room is barely visible between a teetering mountain of debris. Now, I think we've probably all known people who were, well, somewhere.
Yes.
I mean, if you thought of your own living room, where do you think you'd put yourselves?
Yeah, well, you can see.
About 2 or 3, I think.
Yeah.
I think I'm getting close to 4 personally. But I've certainly known people who've been a 9.
Really?
There's somebody I know who, when we went to visit, he had a huge flat, really huge flat, and the only way to get through it was to crawl through. And they called some of the ways of getting into this goat tracks. You have to be like a mountain goat to get through them. That's living room clutter. And these are the way in which they decide on whether people are in serious. On the right hand side in red, obviously, people have got a serious problem. Goes from minor to cautious to unhealthy to high. So there are, pests and bugs, heavy insect infestation, no use of vital living areas, complete blockage of enterways, and so it goes on. And it's interesting, isn't it? There have been so many TV programs about this, of people getting the specialists in to come and declutter them. But of course, that doesn't solve anything, because they just start again. And this is something called a saving cognition inventory. And that's got questions like, I couldn't tolerate it if I had to get rid of this. And this is taking on board that during the past week, if you've tried to, decided to throw something away, and each of these questions rates you on a scale of how sort of much of a saver you are or hoarder you are. Throwing away this possession is like throwing away a part of me. Saving this means I don't have to rely on my memory. Losing a possession is like losing a friend. If the possession became of use to someone else, I'm responsible for saving it for them. And so it goes on. It's all a bit alarming, isn't it, really? So the Hoarders Tragedy, this is for some reason is called the Diogenes syndrome. In fact, it's very unfair on Diogenes, who there is no evidence was particular. He was an orator. He didn't particularly hoard things, I don't think. Or it's known as senile squalor syndrome. Seems to especially affect older people, or maybe they've just had a longer time to hoard.
Yes.
So the tragedy of the hoarder is their inability to convince society that the objects they treasure have value. The line between having a lot of stuff and being a hoarder is basically socially decided. It's a social norm. But it's now hoarding behavior is become not just as an offshoot of OCD, but it's got its own representation in the American Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association, which is the Bible of many psychiatrists. And they define it as a persistent difficulty discarding or parting with possessions regardless of their actual value, which prompts the questions: who gets to do the valuing? This was one particular case that seemed to start a lot of stuff off for some apparent reason, was the Colliers, who were an American couple of brothers who hoarded so much, and this was when they went in to try and de-hoard the area. It actually doesn't look to me that bad compared with other places that I've seen. Actually, they can walk through it just about. They entered it through these narrow goat paths, as they call it in the literature on hoarding. It laid out between the columns of newspapers. There were boxes stacked 4 high, plastic carrier bags burst underfoot. Sometimes they find wet patches and small dried turds laid in corners by an incontinent 3-legged cat. So, depending, as I said, difference between having a lot of stuff and being a hoarder is very much porous. Now, one of the earliest areas of hoarding is called Bibliomania, which is a symptom of obsessive compulsive disorder, which involves the collecting or even hoarding of books to the point where social relations or health are damaged, which is different from bibliophilia, which is the psychologically healthy love of books, and as such is not considered a clinical psychological disorder. It was actually named after this guy, John Faria, who came up with the phrase, and he was actually a physician at Manchester Royal Infirmary. He was Scottish, but he was from Manchester Royal Infirmary in 1761 to 1815 he died. And he coined the term in 1809 in a poem he dedicated to his bibliomaniac manic friend, Richard Heber. Now, this is another famous case of this, Stephen Blomberg. He doesn't look too clever there, does he, really? Looks a bit sort of stressed. Maybe it's the only photograph of him I could find, actually. Considering he kept everything, you'd think there'd be some more photographs. He was convicted of stealing £5.3 million worth of books, over 23,600 books that was discovered in March 20th, 1990. Which in current terms is between $11 and $15 million worth of books. He became known as the Book Bandit and was recognized as the most successful book thief in the history of the United States. He was eventually decided he wasn't psychiatrically conditioned. He didn't go to a mental hospital. He actually went to prison for it. But when he came out, he started doing it again. So he had another sentence, and then when he started out again, he started doing it again. So it was kind of pretty bound into him. Now, in a book written by Adam Phillips on Clutter, A Case History, he makes the case, it's the way we view hoarding, it depends on the stories we tell about it. A hoard that has been curated can become a collection. A collection that has been labeled becomes an archive. Just as a collector who is merely a hoarder, who's got space for the stuff. So I think it's something, it's a relatively speaking, modern concern as people got more and more stuff from the 18th century onwards, especially by the 19th century. But people just didn't have stuff before then. Now, this was a sort of take on it. I don't know how people relate to this. I don't know if you remember it. In 2001, Michael Landy did a performance that was of pulverizing all his worldly possessions, from a Saab 900 car to a single tea bag, leaving nothing but the clothes he was standing in. his passport, everything else went. It took place in the former C&A department store in Oxford Street in London, using a specially designed facility complete with conveyor belts and dismantling bays. So he and a team of operatives sorted and either shredded or granulated everything he owned. First, having inventoried each of the 7,227 items. Eventually, the bagged up remains, weighing 5.75 tons, was buried in a landfill site.
So I have to say, Bernard, that my wife keeps saying to me, "Oh, no more CDs, please, no more CD." But the thing is that I don't know whether the mindset says I have something I can access should I wish to access it at whatever point it is, and that kind maybe it's the character or the spirit of the individual that says I have these things available and I can jump in on them at any point. Why do we have libraries? You know, I've got nearly 12,000 CDs.
What?
Wow.
And I will not get rid of any of them because, and it's happened time and time again when people say to me, I would like something like that. And I go to the CD. My poor daughter spent nearly 6 months cataloguing it all once.
Oh, it's become a collection, and it's now, and also now it's catalogued. It's become an archive.
It's an archive.
Yes.
It just depends on the way you define it, isn't it?
And then my wife calls it a bunch of stuff.
That's right.
Can we get your stuff? I mean, the stuff that's here in this room is merely just the things that have been accessed in the past year or so.
Have you got any stuff that hasn't been accessed in over 10 years?
Yes. But I will never get rid of anything because there is always the thought, and it has happened before when Shaz has sold off something because I thought I had 2 of them.
I think there is that thing that happens when, like, clearing out the garage, which I do occasionally, and then within the next couple of weeks, there's something that I which I needed, which I'd thrown away. At least that's what happens in principle. I don't know whether it actually really happens like that. It feels like that anyway.
Oh, it's fantastic. But I have a real problem with this. I mean, the in terms of not so much it's the effect of other folk who say, "What have you got all this stuff for? You know, why and all the little bits that my children drew or wrote or put together, I cannot stand to throw them out because that's a moment of their time."
Well, we're a bit like you, Bill, because here it's books, and we have a double-sized garage shed or whatever you called it, and at the back is the book room, and it's got literally hundreds and hundreds of books, mostly sort of history, canals, loads and loads on canals, and some of them are very valuable because they're very scarce. And now and again I said, can't we just clear some of these out because books come in and there's nowhere to put them.
I noticed on the list there was keeping things handy to remind you, and that's something I do. My desk here is littered with letters and appointment slips and that, just to remind me. Even though I keep a diary, I have to have them because I forget to look in the diary.
It's all what goes to make up you, isn't it? I mean, it's the things in your life and, you know, what you are in lots of ways.
And you treasure them. Like I've got, well, we said before, I can look up and I can see my Heidi, and Heidi grows up, and and Winnie the Pooh, and I couldn't part with them for the world, you know.